inflation is down to 2.9% according to the latest numbers. But every time you go to the grocery store, it doesn't seem to be that way. It actually seems to be the opposite because every time you go to the store, most likely, if you're just like any other American, you are feeling the pain of inflation and the pain of high prices every time you go to the store. And even when the inflation numbers seem to be on a downtrend, the current administration knows that the prices continue to go up. And that's why current Vice President Kamala Harris on her presidential campaign has mentioned this topic and has proposed something very particular of some governments around the world, and that's price capping.
While our economy is doing well by many measures, prices for everyday things like groceries are still too high. You know it and I know it. When I was Attorney General, I went after price-fixing schemes. And when I am president, I will continue that work to bring down prices. I will take on big corporations that engage in illegal price gouging, corporate landlords that unfairly raise rents on working families, and take on big pharma and cap the cost of prescription drugs for all Americans.
And even when price capping might sound good at the beginning, it actually leads to very hurtful consequences in the long term. Because what price capping truly is the government interfering with the free market on regulating prices and setting a price for goods and services. And like I said, this is nothing new and it's actually something very common on communist and socialist governments. I'll give you an example. The socialist government of my homeland, Venezuela, decided to put price caps in place, not just once, but many, many times in their 25 years that they have remained in power. And all this has led to scarcity of goods and other services. And the reason behind it is because these types of government tend to print a lot of money and don't produce a lot of GDP, which creates an imbalance on the producer side of things. So when a producer or a farmer is going to produce a product, they still have to pay the same amount or even higher because there are no resources or the resources are more scarce. But the government makes them sell those products for a cheaper price, which leads them to have a lot of losses. And we're talking about producing goods. We're not talking about technology companies or anything like that that they have crazy amount of margins. These margins in the side of producing goods are very slim. So when you mandate a specific price for a specific good, these producers do what any person would do. They produce until they can no longer produce. And that's when the scarce of the product begins. On the other hand, when you let the markets work its magic, every producer produce their goods having a margin that eventually will be passed to the consumer, but every consumer will have the opportunity of choose what they can buy. For example, if you go to supermarket A and find a dozen of eggs for $3, but you go to supermarket B and find a dozen of eggs for less than $1 or $1, you most likely are going to choose supermarket B. The same thing happens with any other goods. Of course, the prices of the producers have a lot to do with the inflation that is in the back end of things. If the government keeps printing money and sending money overseas and wiping out a lot of debt, which is printing money, but doesn't produce anything, it doesn't produce any goods, normally the inflation will rise. I'm not telling you that price caps will lead to scarcity because somebody told me. No, I lived it, just like all other 8 million Venezuelans that have had to flee our homeland because of many, many reasons. So, if price caps is a policy that eventually will hurt the American consumer, what's the solution? One of the solutions is to give the small farmers incentive to produce more goods and more foods and to work with local supermarkets in order to have a better food chain supply. Also, avoiding that big companies that govern the entire farm industry continue to do that, and once again give the opportunity to small farmers, and that those small farmers work with local supermarkets. So if you think that price capping a product or a service is the solution, think about it twice. Do your own research, because prosperity should not be taken for granted.